The medical bay of Rosada 7 Station was a sterile, state-of-the-art facility designed to accommodate the vast range of species that passed through the station's docks. Dr. Lisek had spent years studying alien physiology, treating creatures that defied logic and reason. He had stabilized patients whose nervous systems existed in multiple dimensions, reassembled creatures that could survive partial liquefaction, and once even extracted a living parasite from a patient's spinal fluid without causing permanent damage. He had never been surprised by a biological anomaly. Until today. The human, Eric, entered the examination room carrying a small, furred creature in his arms. He cradled it gently, as if holding something both delicate and deeply important. Lisek's fingers hovered over the medical scanner as he observed the creature. It was small, quadrupedal, and covered in dense fur. Two triangular ears flicked at the air, responding to invisible stimuli. A long, flexible tail curled lazily around the human's arm. Its green eyes blinked slowly before it tucked its head under one of its paws. Lisek frowned. "You require medical assistance." "Not for me." "For her," Eric said, adjusting his hold on the creature. "Muffin is due for a checkup." Lisek stared at him. "You brought an Earth creature for a voluntary medical examination." "Yeah," Eric said. "She's my cat." Lisek had read about Earth's fauna. He had studied human biology extensively, but their so-called pets had been of little concern to him. Domesticated animals had no place in medical literature beyond zoonotic infections and occasional bites. "I will scan for abnormalities," Lisek said, gesturing to the table. Eric set Muffin down. She stretched, arched her back, and then settled into a loaf-like position, tail wrapped neatly around her paws. Lisek activated the scanner. Immediately, the readout displayed a series of physiological metrics: stable heart rate, oxygenation levels within expected parameters, neural activity within standard mammalian range. Then Lisek noticed something unusual. "She is exhibiting continuous, low-frequency muscular tremors." Eric blinked. "What?" Lisek adjusted the scanner. "The vibrations originate from the laryngeal region and occur at a consistent rhythm. This may indicate neurological instability." Eric chuckled. "Oh, she's just purring." Lisek frowned. "Clarify." "Cats purr when they're happy," Eric said. "It means she's comfortable." Lisek studied the scanner again. The vibrations did not correlate with pain responses, stress reactions, or thermoregulation mechanisms. There was no logical biological function. "She is expending energy to generate these vibrations without necessity." "Yeah," Eric said, scratching behind Muffin's ears. The vibrations intensified. Lisek stiffened. "The anomaly is increasing." Eric grinned. "She likes it." Lisek narrowed his eyes. "You are telling me that this organism voluntarily initiates continuous muscle contractions as a response to external stimulus?" "Yes." Lisek turned the scanner toward Eric's hands, searching for some undetected interaction. "Is there an electrochemical exchange occurring? Does your skin emit a frequency that triggers this response?" "No, she just enjoys being petted," Eric said. Lisek recoiled slightly as Muffin rubbed her head against Eric's arm and let out an even louder burst of vibrations. Lisek tapped his console. "The energy output is irrational. This is a behavior without evolutionary purpose." Eric shrugged. "That's cats." Lisek observed as Muffin shifted, nudging her head into Eric's hand with insistence. Each time Eric complied, the vibrations remained steady. "This serves no survival function," Lisek muttered. "Excessive energy expenditure for no gain. It is an inefficient trait." Eric scratched under Muffin's chin. "Maybe. But it makes her happy." Lisek folded his arms. "Emotional states do not override biological limitations." "They do for humans," Eric said. Lisek narrowed his eyes. "Are you suggesting that your species also engages in unnecessary energy expenditure for emotional satisfaction?" Eric grinned. "You ever seen humans dance?" Lisek's mandibles twitched in irritation. "That is an unrelated matter." Eric chuckled and continued scratching Muffin, who had now rolled onto her side, stretching her front paws luxuriously. The purring remained constant, Lisek checked the readings again. There were no abnormalities beyond the inexplicable vibrations. Your creature is not malfunctioning, Lisek said at last. Told you, Eric said. Lisek hesitated, then extended one of his hands. Slowly, cautiously, he pressed 2 fingers against Muffin's fur. The vibrations pulsed through his fingertips in a way that defied logic. The pattern was steady, unwavering. It was not an involuntary tremor, nor a symptom of distress. It was a choice. Lisek pulled his hand back. This contradicts all known biological principles. Eric laughed. Welcome to the world of cats. Lisek exhaled sharply and made a note in the station's medical records. Species Felis catus. Exhibits voluntary vibrational behavior when exposed to preferred stimuli. No medical intervention required. Further study recommended. He looked at Muffin, still purring. He had no doubt that this was only the beginning of his confusion. Lisek had treated countless alien species, each with its own bizarre biological quirks. He had worked with creatures whose skins secreted anesthetics, beings that could regrow entire limbs in hours, and even a sentient colony of bacteria that communicated via chemical pulses. Yet, none of those cases had perplexed him the way Muffin did. The cat was healthy, completely functional, yet it purred a continuous, voluntary vibration that had no evolutionary purpose, no survival function, and no reason to exist. It bothered him. He had spent hours reviewing the medical scans, looking for any irregularity he might have missed. There was none. The data was clear. Muffin purred in response to comfort and relaxation. That should have been the end of it. It was not. 3 days after the initial checkup, Eric returned to the medical bay. She's still doing it, Eric said as he stepped inside, Muffin draped over his shoulder like some kind of living scarf. Lisek, who had been meticulously cataloging microbial adaptations in deep space life forms, barely looked up. You were already informed that the vibrations do not indicate illness. I know, Eric said, adjusting Muffin slightly as she shifted in his arms, but I figured you'd want another chance to study it. Lisek's frills twitched. You assume correctly. He gestured for Eric to place Muffin on the examination table. Muffin landed softly on the surface, stretched her front paws forward, and immediately began purring. Lisek activated the scanner, watching as the same readings appeared: low-frequency muscular contractions originating in the laryngeal region, steady heart rate, no signs of distress. The behavior was consistent with their previous encounter. Eric reached forward and scratched behind Muffin's ears. The vibrations intensified. Lisek exhaled sharply. This behavior is persistent across all interactions. Pretty much, Eric said. Unless she's asleep or eating. Lisek considered this, and there is no external factor that triggers it aside from physical touch. Well, Eric said, rubbing his chin, she also purrs when she's sitting in a warm spot, curled up somewhere cozy, or just hanging out. Lisek tapped a note into his database. Behavior persists in states of relaxation independent of external stimuli. Muffin rolled onto her back, exposing her belly, and the vibrations intensified again. Lisek narrowed his eyes. It is responding positively to a vulnerable position. Eric grinned. That's a sign of trust. Lisek hesitated before extending a cautious hand. He placed 2 fingers on Muffin's side and felt the steady hum reverberate through his touch. The sensation was strange, not unpleasant, but wholly unnecessary from a biological standpoint. There is no precedent for an organism that produces voluntary vibrations for non-essential reasons, Lisek muttered. Well, now there is, Eric said. Lisek folded his arms. There must be a reason for this behavior. Does there, Eric countered. Maybe it's just nice? Lisek scowled. That was not a satisfactory explanation. Nothing in nature happened just because. Evolution favored efficiency, yet this creature wasted metabolic resources on a function that did nothing. It is an evolutionary contradiction, Lisek said. Eric shrugged. Maybe it's not about evolution. Maybe it's about comfort. Lisek frowned. The very idea that a species could develop a biological function purely for comfort was absurd. Yet the data did not lie. Muffin let out a long, slow blink, completely content. The purring continued. Lisek turned back to his scanner, determined to find an answer. Hours later, Lisek still had no conclusive findings. Every test he ran confirmed the same results. Muffin's purring was a voluntary action tied to relaxation. The frequency of the vibrations varied slightly depending on the level of physical interaction, but the core function remained unchanged. He expanded his research, scanning through Earth's historical records on domesticated species. What he found did not help. The available studies on feline purring contain no definitive explanations. Some human scientists theorized that the vibrations could promote bone growth or reduce stress, but none of the claims were substantiated. Even among humans, the reason for purring remained uncertain. Lisek closed the report and rubbed his temples. The most advanced medical minds of Earth had failed to explain this phenomenon. It was maddening. His internal communicator chimed, interrupting his frustration. "Lisek here," he said. "Doctor, we have a minor injury case in the engineering bay," came the voice of one of his medical assistants. "A human technician suffered a laceration while working on a coolant line. The wound is stable, but protocol requires evaluation." Lisek exhaled. "Understood. I will be there shortly." He turned to shut down the scanner, then noticed Muffin still perched on the table, watching him with unblinking green eyes. The purring continued. Lisek sighed. "Eric, retrieve your creature." Eric grinned. "You like her, don't you?" "I find her presence distracting," Lisek said. Muffin, as if sensing his attention, stretched luxuriously and emitted an even louder purr. Eric picked her up, laughing. "She's growing on you." "She is not." "She totally is." Lisek ignored him and left for the engineering bay. The next day, Lisek found Muffin in his office. The feline had somehow bypassed station security, navigated the automated doors, and made herself comfortable on his terminal. She lay sprawled across his data pads, tail flicking lazily. Lisek froze in the doorway. Muffin blinked at him. The purring started. Lisek clenched his jaw. "This is unacceptable." He activated his communicator. "Eric." A crackle, then Eric's amused voice. "Yeah. Retrieve your creature." A pause. "She found your office, didn't she?" Lisek scowled. "She is interfering with my work." "She does that," Eric said. "You could just let her stay." "I refuse." Muffin, completely undeterred, rolled onto her side and yawned. The purring continued. Lisek exhaled sharply. This was going to be a problem. Lisek had not signed up for this. He was a medical professional, an expert in xenobiology, a specialist in treating species whose anatomy defied logic. He was not under any circumstances a caretaker for a small, fur-covered Earth creature that had somehow decided his office was hers. Yet for the third time that week, he walked into his workspace to find Muffin curled up on his terminal, her tail draped over a stack of medical reports. Purring. Lisek stopped in the doorway, inhaled slowly, and tapped his communicator. "Eric." A crackle, then, "Yeah." Lisek's mandibles twitched. "She is here." Again. A pause. Then a chuckle. "Muffin really likes you, huh?" "I do not desire her presence." "Well, she desires yours," Eric said. Lisek exhaled sharply and walked to his desk. "Remove her." "Yeah, come on, Doc. She's not hurting anything." "She is obstructing my workstation." Lisek reached forward to pick Muffin up, but the moment he touched her, she stretched luxuriously, nuzzled his arm, and increased the intensity of her purring. Lisek froze. This was escalating. He carefully withdrew his hand. Muffin, fully at ease, tucked her paws beneath her body and closed her eyes. The vibrations continued. Eric's voice crackled over the communicator. Doc. Lisek clenched his jaw. Your creature has claimed my desk. Eric laughed. Yeah, that happens. Lisek folded his arms. How do I reverse this? You don't, Eric said. You've been chosen. Lisek narrowed his eyes. This is not a selection process. I have provided no reinforcement. Doesn't matter. Cats pick their people. Lisek scowled at Muffin, who remained utterly unbothered. Unacceptable. Eric was still laughing. Good luck with that. Lisek disconnected the call and turned back to the cat. You are leaving. Muffin yawned and stretched again, completely ignoring him. The purring continued. Lisek rubbed his temples. By the end of the week, it was clear that this problem was not going away. Muffin followed him everywhere. She waited outside the medical bay, slipping in when the doors opened. She lurked near the examination tables, watching him with unblinking green eyes. She somehow figured out how to bypass the biometric lock on his office door. The station personnel found it hilarious. I think she's bonded to you, Vren, the station's administrative officer said as she passed by Lisek's desk. Lisek didn't look up. That is not possible. Vren smirked. Tell her that. Lisek shot a glance at Muffin, who was curled up on his chair, purring at full intensity. Vren chuckled. You're doomed. Lisek scowled and turned back to his reports. The real trouble began when Muffin started interfering with patients. Lisek had been examining a Krell officer who had suffered a minor chitin fracture. Krell physiology was dense, their exoskeletal plates requiring specialized reinforcement to heal correctly. He had just activated the stabilization field when... Purring. Lisek's mandibles tightened. He turned his head slowly. Muffin had somehow entered the medical bay undetected and was now sitting on the counter, watching him intently. The Krell officer tilted his head. What is that noise? Lisek exhaled. It is not medical equipment. Muffin flicked her tail. The Krell officer studied her for a moment. Is it defective? Lisek rubbed his temple. No. The Krell narrowed his many eyes. Then why is it vibrating? Lisek sighed. Because it wants to. There was a long silence. The Krell officer leaned in slightly. That is inefficient. Lisek nodded. I am aware. The purring continued. Lisek tried everything. He attempted to lock Muffin out of his office. She meowed at the door until one of his assistants let her in. He tried ignoring her. She pounced onto his datapads and sprawled across them. He attempted not interacting with her at all. She climbed onto his shoulder, draped herself around his neck, and purred directly into his auditory sensors. It was relentless. Lisek had treated some of the most aggressive species in the known galaxy. He had outmaneuvered hyper-intelligent parasites and negotiated with beings who communicated solely through pheromones. Yet he could not win against this small, persistent, purring organism. His frustration grew. But so did something else. A strange realization settled over him, an unsettling truth he could not ignore. Despite her interference, despite the inefficiency, despite the purring, Muffin's presence was not unpleasant. Lisek could not explain it. He had been raised in a culture that valued logic and efficiency above all else. Everything had a purpose. Every function served survival. And yet, Muffin did nothing but exist, produce unnecessary vibrations, and demand attention. And somehow, he had adjusted to it. He caught himself automatically shifting his datapads when she sprawled across them. He had begun expecting her presence, mentally factoring her into his routine. He found himself pausing, just for a second, whenever she rubbed against him, just enough to notice the sensation before he forced himself to move away. It was deeply troubling. Lisek sat at his desk, staring at the medical report in front of him, trying to suppress the reality of his situation. Muffin was curled up nearby, perfectly at ease. Lisek sighed. This was his life now. Lisek had not planned for this. He had spent his career treating creatures whose biology defied logic, whose very existence seemed to mock the natural laws of efficiency. He had dedicated himself to the pursuit of medical precision, understanding the intricate systems of beings from every known quadrant of the galaxy. And yet, despite all his expertise, he had been entirely unprepared for this. Muffin had taken over his life. He did not know exactly when he stopped resisting. It had happened gradually, subtly, without his awareness. One day he was shooing her off his workstation with irritation. The next he was absent-mindedly shifting his datapads to accommodate her preferred sleeping spot. At some point he had accepted it. Accepted that she would always be waiting outside the medical bay. Accepted that she would slip into his office, bypassing every attempt at containment. Accepted that she would drape herself over his desk, flicking her tail idly as if she belonged there. And worst of all, he had accepted the purring. At first, it had been a source of deep frustration. Now it had become a part of his daily routine, a background hum that followed him through his work. He had learned its variations: the steady, contented rhythm of relaxation, the softer, almost questioning purr when she sought attention, the deep, rumbling vibrations when she stretched luxuriously across his console, knowing she would not be moved. It had embedded itself into his existence. And that was how he knew something was wrong when the purring stopped. Eric stormed into the medical bay, his face unusually tense. Muffin's missing. Lisek's frills stiffened. Clarify. I haven't seen her in hours, Eric said. She wasn't in my quarters. She's not in your office either. I checked all her usual spots. She's gone. Lisek turned to his console without hesitation. Rosada 7 has biometric tracking. I will locate her heat signature. Eric exhaled sharply. Thank you. Lisek ran the search, filtering through the station's internal sensors. Muffin did not appear in the common areas, the docking bay, or the engineering wing. That was troubling. He expanded the search. After 2 minutes, his scanner picked up a faint, warm-blooded signature near the maintenance ducts. His mandibles tightened. She is in the ventilation system. Eric cursed. Damn it, that's not good. The maintenance ducts were not designed for living creatures. They were tight, winding pathways meant for temperature regulation and internal repairs. If Muffin had wandered inside, she could be trapped. Lisek grabbed a portable scanner. We will retrieve her. They located the access panel quickly. Eric pried it open, peering inside. Muffin. A faint sound echoed from within. Not a meow, not scratching. Lisek's frills twitched. She is comfortable. Eric groaned. Of course she is. They worked fast, widening the opening to allow better access. Lisek crawled inside first, following the scanner's signal. The ducts were dim, the metallic surfaces cold against his hands. He maneuvered carefully, adjusting for the narrow space. Then, around a bend, he found her. Muffin was curled up in a warm corner, her tail wrapped neatly around her paws. She blinked up at him, entirely at ease. And she purred. Lisek's jaw clenched. She is not trapped. She has nested. Eric, who had squeezed in behind him, sighed. Unbelievable. Lisek carefully lifted Muffin, who did not resist. As he held her, she rubbed her head against his arm and increased the intensity of her purring. Eric chuckled. She scared the hell out of us, and she has no idea. Lisek exhaled sharply. Absurd creature. They backed out of the vent, returning to open space. Muffin remained perfectly relaxed in Lisek's hold, tail flicking lazily. Eric scratched her head. You're lucky Lisek likes you. Lisek stiffened. I do not. Eric smirked. Sure, that's why you dropped everything to find her. Lisek had no response to that. Eric grinned. You know, if you ever want one of your own, there are plenty in the shelters. Lisek looked down at Muffin, who was still nestled against him, purring away. He inhaled slowly. I will. Consider it. Eric clapped him on the shoulder. That's a start. Lisek did not respond. But later that night, when Muffin curled up on his desk as usual, he let her stay. And for the first time, he reached out just briefly and ran a hand over her fur. The purring deepened. Lisek sighed. He was never going to understand this creature. And somehow, that was fine.